History is not just a river of stories, but a record of real people, real events, and real identities. For centuries, the true identity of the Hebrews and Jews has been hidden, rewritten, and even stolen. Today we will uncover the facts, step by step, about who the true descendants of the ancient Israelites are, and how their identity was systematically taken and replaced by others throughout history. Much of what we know as history is actually his story, a version told by those in power. The true story of the Hebrews and Jews was often whispered in secret, passed down in families, and hidden from the mainstream. But now, these whispers are becoming clear voices, revealing a hidden truth. The people known as Jews today are not the same as the original Hebrews of the Bible. The ancient records, inscriptions, scrolls, and oral traditions point to a specific people, the descendants of Shem, through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, also called Israel. These people were dark-skinned, lived in the Middle East and Africa, and were set apart by their covenant with YaHuWaH. Their story is not just spiritual but historical and genealogical. Over time, as empires rose and fell, the true Hebrews were scattered and oppressed. Their records were often seized, rewritten, or destroyed. Meanwhile, other groups began to claim their identity, sometimes for political power, sometimes for religious legitimacy. The bloodline of the true Hebrews is clear in ancient genealogies. They are the descendants of Jacob, also called Israel, whose 12 sons became the tribes of Israel. But as centuries passed, others began to insert themselves into this lineage, distorting the truth for their own gain. The Hebrews' journey began in the ancient Middle East, but their descendants were scattered across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. Despite this, their identity remained tied to the covenant with YaHuWaH. But as they were exiled and enslaved, their name and heritage became vulnerable to theft. The story began with a single family, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their descendants, the Israelites, were the original Hebrews, but as time went on, their identity was targeted by outsiders who wanted to claim their legacy. After the flood, Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the ancestors of all nations. The Hebrews descended from Shem, but as the centuries passed, the true Shemitic people were scattered, and their identity became contested. As the Israelites spread, other groups began to covet their status. The Edomites, descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother, were among the first to betray and distort the legacy of true Israel. This would set the stage for centuries of confusion and deception. The Bible itself warns of imposters, those who say they are Jews and are not. This is not just a spiritual warning but a historical reality. The true Hebrews were often marginalized while others took their name and heritage. The focus narrows to the line of Shem, then to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But as the Israelites were conquered and scattered, their identity was increasingly claimed by outsiders. The true Hebrews are the descendants of Shem through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But their identity was targeted by groups who wanted the blessings and status of being YaHuWaH's chosen. This is not a story about all of humanity, but about a specific people. Yet over time, others, especially the Edomites and later the Khazars, who would claim to be Jews, even though they were not descendants of Jacob. The Israelites' journey was unique, but their identity was constantly under threat. The Edomites, descendants of Esau, were often engaged in bitter disputes with Israel. Even though they were relatives, Edom was considered an enemy to Israel, and even assisted other nations in attacking Israel. To be chosen meant to be set apart, but it also made the Hebrews a target. Later in history, the Khazars, who according to sources became known as the name stealers, those who took the identity of the true Jews for their own purposes. The concept of a chosen people was powerful. It attracted those who wanted the blessings and authority that came with the name Jew, even if they were not true descendants of Jacob. This led to debates and conflicts. The true Hebrews knew their lineage, but outsiders, especially the Edomites and later the Khazars, insisted on being called Jews, even though their ancestry was different. The true Hebrews carried the burden of their identity, even as others tried to take it. This was not a privilege, but a responsibility, and a source of suffering as their name was stolen. The real Israelites passed their traditions and knowledge from generation to generation. Even as their identity was being erased from mainstream history, their journey was marked by blessings and curses, depending on their faithfulness. But as their identity was stolen, the world lost sight of who the true Hebrews were. The Israelites grew from a family to a nation, but their name was gradually taken by others. The Edomites, starting with King Herod Antipas and the Herodians, began to call themselves Jews. Later, the Khazars, a Turkic people from the Caucasus Mountains, converted to Judaism in the 8th century and also claimed the name. Abraham was the father of the Hebrews, but over time his descendants' identity was taken by others. The Khazars, who as mentioned previously had no blood connection to Abraham, adopted Judaism and began to call themselves Jews, further confusing the world about the true identity of the Hebrews. The covenant with Abraham was sacred, but it was not inherited by the Edomites or the Khazars. Yet, through political maneuvering and conversion, these groups became known as Jews in the eyes of the world. The promise to Abraham was for his true descendants. But as the centuries passed, the world began to associate the name Jew with people who had no blood connection to Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. The true blessing was meant for the descendants of Abraham, but the world was deceived by the name stealers, the Edomites and Khazars, who claimed the identity of the Hebrews. The foundation of the Hebrew identity is clear in ancient records, but it was covered up by centuries of lies and substitutions. As mentioned, the Khazars in particular played a major role in this deception, as did the Edomites who infiltrated Judea. One of the most famous impostors was Herod the Great. He called himself King of the Jews, but he was not a descendant of Judah or Jacob. Herod was an Idumean, an Edomite, descended from Esau, Jacob's brother. The Romans installed him as king, and he used the title for political power, not because of true Hebrew lineage. This marked a turning point, as Edomites and other outsiders took control of the name and legacy of the Jews, while the true Hebrews were scattered, enslaved, and forgotten by the world. Today, the descendants of the true Hebrews are awakening to their identity, reclaiming their history, and exposing the truth that has been hidden for centuries. Within the covenant made with Abraham lies a startling and specific prophecy. This is not merely a promise of land, descendants, and blessing, but a revelation that would shape the destiny of an entire people for generations to come. The words spoken to Abraham echo through the corridors of time, their significance growing with each passing century. As we open the ancient texts and peer into the heart of the covenant, we find not only hope and promise but also a shadow, a warning that greatness would come at a tremendous cost. It is a dark premonition that casts a long shadow over the promise of greatness. The prophecy is not shrouded in mystery or vague omens. It is direct, unflinching, and sobering. It tells of a future marked by suffering, a time when the descendants of Abraham would endure unimaginable hardship. This foretelling is not meant to discourage but to prepare, to steel the hearts of those who would inherit the promise so that they might endure the trials ahead with faith and resilience. In the book of Genesis, chapter 15, YaHuWaH reveals to Abraham the fate of his future descendants. The scene is intimate and profound. Abraham, alone under the vast night sky, is visited by the divine. The words spoken are both a comfort and a challenge, a vision of what is to come. The text reads, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there for 400 years. This is not a passing comment but a declaration that would become a cornerstone of the biblical narrative. He tells him that his offspring will be strangers in a land that is not their own. Imagine the weight of these words for Abraham, a man who had already left his homeland in obedience to a divine call. Now he learns that his children, and their children after them, will wander as foreigners, never fully belonging, always on the margins of another society. The sense of displacement, of being outsiders, would become a defining feature of their identity. They will be enslaved and afflicted there. The prophecy does not shy away from the harsh reality of bondage. It speaks of chains, of forced labor, of suffering imposed by the hands of others. This is not a metaphorical enslavement but a literal one, an existence marked by oppression, humiliation, and pain. The descendants of Abraham would know the bitterness of captivity, the sting of injustice, and the longing for deliverance. And the duration of this suffering is explicitly stated, 400 years. This is not a vague warning of potential hardship. It is a precise timeline of captivity, a period of bondage that was foretold centuries before it would come to pass. The specificity of the prophecy is striking. 4 centuries, long enough for generations to be born and die in slavery, for hope to flicker and fade, and for the memory of freedom to become a distant dream. This is not a vague warning of potential hardship. It is a precise timeline of captivity, a period of bondage that was foretold centuries before it would come to pass. The prophecy is so detailed that it leaves little room for ambiguity. It is as if the future is being mapped out in advance, each year accounted for, each moment of suffering weighed and measured. This level of detail invites us to look deeper, to search for meaning in the numbers and the narrative. This prophecy is a critical key to understanding the story of this people. It unlocks the deeper layers of their journey, revealing that their suffering is not random or meaningless, but part of a larger design. The 400 years become a lens through which we can interpret the events that follow, prophetic events that have shaped the destiny of a nation. The promise of blessing is inextricably linked to the reality of suffering and bondage. The two are not opposites but partners in a divine dance. The blessing is made more precious by the suffering that precedes it. The suffering is made bearable by the hope of eventual blessing. This paradox lies at the heart of the covenant, a people chosen not for ease but for endurance, not for comfort but for courage. It suggests that their journey toward fulfilling their destiny will not be easy. The road ahead is fraught with obstacles, each step a test of faith. The promise of a homeland of prosperity and peace is always just beyond the horizon, beckoning them forward even as the storms rage around them. The journey itself becomes a crucible, shaping the people into who they are meant to be. It will be marked by periods of exile and oppression, tests of faith that push them to the very brink. These are not mere historical footnotes, but defining moments that reveal the true character of a people. In the darkness of exile, in the loneliness of oppression, the seeds of hope are sown. Each trial becomes an opportunity for growth, each hardship a lesson in perseverance. This initial forecast of affliction, given at the very moment the covenant is established, tells us that captivity is an integral part of their story, a crucible through which they must pass. The forging of chains is not only a symbol of oppression but also of transformation. In the darkness of the dungeon, in the silence of the desert night, a new identity is being formed, one that will endure long after the chains are broken. The glory of redemption is made all the more profound by the depths of the suffering that precedes it. When the chains finally break, when the dawn of freedom arrives, the joy is magnified by the memory of pain. The story of deliverance is not just about escape from bondage, but about the transformation that occurs in the process. The people who emerge from the crucible are not the same as those who entered it. They are stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected to their purpose. Consider the immense weight of this foreknowledge. Abraham, the father of the Hebrews, is given a glimpse into the distant future, a vision that is both awe-inspiring and terrifying. To know that your descendants will suffer, to carry that knowledge in your heart, is a burden few could bear. Yet Abraham accepts it, trusting that the same Elohim who foretells the suffering will also provide the redemption. Abraham is promised a legacy of nations and kings, yet in the same breath he learns of his children's future enslavement. This juxtaposition of glory and grief, of promise and pain, is at the core of the Abrahamic story. It is a reminder that greatness is often born out of struggle, that the crown is often found beside the chains. The legacy of Abraham is not one of unbroken triumph but of perseverance through adversity. This duality is central to their identity. The people of the promise are shaped by both the hope of the future and the reality of the present. They carry within them the memory of chains and the vision of crowns, the pain of exile and the dream of home. This tension is not a flaw but a feature, a source of strength that enables them to endure whatever comes. Theirs is a path of paradoxes, chosen yet afflicted, blessed yet enslaved, promised a homeland yet destined to be strangers in foreign lands. Each step on this journey is marked by both joy and sorrow, by moments of triumph and times of despair. The story of Abraham's descendants is not a simple tale of victory, but a complex narrative of faith tested and renewed. This prophecy becomes a lens through which we can view their history, a blueprint for a cycle of events that seems to be divinely ordained. The 400 years are not just a period of suffering, but a framework for understanding the unfolding of destiny. Each generation is invited to see their own struggles in light of this ancient promise, to find meaning in the midst of hardship. It invites us to look for its fulfillment, to search the annals of history for a period of 400 years of affliction that matches the divine timeline laid out in Genesis. Scholars and seekers alike have pored over the records, tracing the movements of peoples and the rise and fall of empires, searching for the fulfillment of this remarkable prophecy. The question is not only when it happened, but how it continues to shape the identity of those who claim Abraham as their ancestor. This ancient prophecy compels us to ask a bold and perhaps unsettling question. If the 400 years of affliction were foretold so precisely, could it be that a false narrative has been created to hide the identity of those whom the prophecy speaks of? The search for answers leads us down unexpected paths, challenging our assumptions and expanding our understanding of history. Has this prophecy been fulfilled right under our noses? The idea is both provocative and profound, inviting us to reconsider the meaning of prophecy itself. Perhaps the 400 years are not just a historical fact, but a spiritual principle, a powerful promise that reveals the workings of the divine in the affairs of his chosen people. While many associate it with the bondage in ancient Egypt, could its echoes be heard in more recent times? The image of slaves in Egypt is deeply embedded in our collective memory, but history has another disturbing story of captivity and oppression. The transatlantic slave trade, for example, bears a haunting resemblance to the ancient 400-year narrative. A people taken from their homeland, forced into bondage, enduring centuries of suffering. The parallels are striking, and they raise important questions about the nature of prophecy and the identity of those who endure it. We must examine history with an open mind, looking for patterns that align with the biblical narrative. The story of the transatlantic slave trade is not just a chapter in the history of the Americas, but a global event that reshaped the world. Millions of men, women, and children were uprooted from their homes, transported across oceans, and subjected to unimaginable cruelty. The legacy of this trauma continues to shape societies today, echoing the ancient prophecy in ways that demand our attention. The transatlantic slave trade, a brutal chapter in human history that started in 1619 and was commemorated by the U.S. government in 2019, a period of exactly 400 years. This timeline is not a coincidence but a chilling fulfillment of an ancient promise due to disobedience. For 4 centuries, generations of African descendants lived under the shadow of slavery, segregation, and systemic oppression. Their story is one of survival against all odds, of hope that refused to die, of faith that endured through the darkest of nights. As previously mentioned, in 2019 the United States government itself, perhaps unintentionally, acknowledged this timeline with House Resolution 1242, which calls for commemorating the 400th anniversary of the arrival of Africans in the English colonies. This official recognition is more than a historical marker. It is a moment of reckoning, an invitation to reflect on the meaning of the past and its impact on the present. The echoes of the 400-year prophecy resound in the halls of power, challenging us to confront the legacy of bondage and the promise of redemption. The connection is startling and demands a deeper investigation into the identity of the people who endured this modern bondage. Who are the true heirs of the 400-year prophecy? What does it mean to be a people shaped by both suffering and hope, by both exile and promise? As we continue to explore the echoes of this ancient prediction, we are invited to see ourselves in the story, to recognize that the journey from bondage to freedom is not just a tale of the past, but a living reality that continues to unfold in our own time. The relationship between YaHuWaH and his chosen people is not a simple one. It is a relationship marked by deep complexity, emotion, and a sense of destiny that stretches across generations. From the earliest days when Abraham first heard the call to leave his homeland and follow a voice he could not see, to the dramatic events that would shape the nation of Israel, this relationship has been at the heart of the biblical narrative. It is a story of promise and expectation, of hope and heartbreak, of faithfulness and failure. The bond between YaHuWaH and Israel is not static. It is dynamic, living, and often turbulent, reflecting the very real struggles of a people wavering between obedience and disobedience while trying to walk in the light of a divine calling. It is a dramatic, unfolding saga characterized by a consistent and powerful pattern: covenant, rebellion, punishment, and repentance, followed by redemption. This pattern is not merely a backdrop to the story, it is the very engine that drives the narrative forward. Each generation faces the same fundamental choice: to remain faithful to the covenant established with their ancestors, or to turn away and follow their own desires. The consequences of these choices are profound, shaping not only the fate of individuals, but the destiny of the entire nation. This cycle is not an occasional occurrence, it is the very rhythm of their history. Like the rising and setting of the sun, the people of Israel moved through seasons of faithfulness and seasons of rebellion, The ancient stones of Jerusalem, worn smooth by the footsteps of countless descendants, bear silent witness to this unending cycle. Each sunrise brings the hope of renewal, while each sunset is a reminder of past failures and the ever-present need for repentance. Time and time again, the scriptures show YaHuWaH's chosen people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, turning away from the laws and commandments they were given. Despite the miracles they witnessed, the victories they achieved, and the blessings they received, they often found themselves drawn to the customs and gods of the nations around them. The allure of foreign practices, the temptation to blend in rather than stand apart, proved to be a persistent challenge. The prophets lamented this tendency, warning that forgetting the covenant would lead to disaster. They forget their covenant, embrace the ways of the Gentile nations around them, and fall into idolatry. The worship of foreign gods was not just a matter of religious preference, it was a rejection of their unique identity and calling. Idolatry represented a turning away from the source of life and blessing, and a turning toward emptiness and ruin. The broken idols scattered among the ruins are a stark reminder of the consequences of such choices. This rebellion never goes unanswered. The scriptures are clear. YaHuWaH is the Elohim of justice as well as mercy. When his people stray, he responds, not out of spite, but out of a desire to correct and restore. The gathering storm clouds over the ancient landscape symbolize the coming judgment, a warning that actions have consequences. The land itself seems to mourn, its once fertile fields turning barren, its cities falling into ruin. It is always met with divine judgment, a corrective punishment designed to bring them back to their Elohim. The judgment is not arbitrary, it is purposeful, intended to awaken the conscience of the people and lead them to repentance. The abandoned villages and toppled columns are not just relics of the past, they are testimonies to the seriousness with which YaHuWaH regards his covenant. This pattern is laid out with chilling clarity in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28. Here, Moses, the great lawgiver, stands before the people and delivers a message that will echo through the ages. He outlines in painstaking detail the blessings that will follow obedience and the curses that will follow disobedience. The words are not vague or abstract, they are concrete, specific, and deeply personal. Before the children of Israel even enter the Promised Land, they are given a stark choice. Standing on the threshold of a new beginning, they are reminded that their future depends on the choices they make. The land before them is a land of promise, but it is also a land of responsibility. The covenant is not a one-time event. It is a living agreement that must be renewed and honored by each generation. If they obey the voice of YaHuWaH, they will be blessed above all nations. The blessings are described in vivid detail: abundant harvests, healthy families, peace within their borders, and respect among the nations. The land itself will flourish, yielding its fruit in season and providing for all their needs. The people will experience a sense of security and well-being that is the envy of the world. They will have prosperity, health, and victory over their enemies. Their livestock will multiply, their children will thrive, and their armies will be victorious. The blessings are comprehensive, touching every aspect of life. They are a reflection of the goodness and generosity of YaHuWaH, who delights in the well-being of his people. But if they disobey, a series of devastating curses will befall them. The contrast could not be more stark. The same land that promised abundance will become a place of hardship and suffering. The rain will cease, the crops will fail, and the people will experience hunger and thirst. The curses are not limited to the physical realm. They extend to every area of life, including mental and emotional well-being. These curses are not vague threats, they are terrifyingly specific. Disease, drought, and famine are just the beginning. The people will experience confusion, fear, and despair. Their enemies will triumph over them, and they will be forced to flee from the land that was meant to be their inheritance. The ancient inscriptions and fearful faces depicted in murals serve as a haunting reminder of the reality of these warnings. They include disease, drought, famine, madness, and defeat in battle. The land that once flowed with milk and honey will become a place of desolation. The people will be struck with illnesses that have no cure, their minds will be troubled, and their strength will fail. The battlefield, once a place of victory, will become a place of loss and mourning. Most significantly, the curses describe a future where they will be kidnapped, taken by ship, and scattered among all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other, their children taken by force, their women violated, an iron yoke placed around their necks, and being forced to serve other gods. Exile was the ultimate consequence, a loss not only of life and land, but of identity. The people who were called to be a light to the nations will find themselves wandering in darkness far from home, longing for a return that seems impossible. The subsequent history recorded in the Bible is a validation of this prophecy. The words spoken by Moses are not empty threats. They are a blueprint for what will unfold over the centuries. The rise and fall of kingdoms, the cycles of blessing and curse are all foretold in the ancient texts. The scrolls and inscriptions that have survived the ages bear witness to the accuracy of these predictions. We see the nation of Israel rise to greatness under kings like David and Solomon, enjoying the blessings of obedience. Under their leadership, the nation experiences a golden age of prosperity, unity, and spiritual vitality. The temple in Jerusalem becomes the center of worship, and the people are filled with a sense of purpose and destiny. The promises of the covenant seem to be fulfilled in their entirety. But we also see their repeated descent into rebellion. The very leaders who are meant to guide the people sometimes lead them astray. The allure of power, wealth, and foreign alliances proves too great, and the nation begins to drift from its moral roots. The prophets cry out in warning, but their voices are often ignored or silenced. This leads to the nation being torn in two, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The unity that once defined the people is shattered, and old rivalries resurface. The division weakens both kingdoms, making them vulnerable to external threats and internal decay. The map of Israel, once whole, is now marked by lines of separation and conflict. Both kingdoms eventually fall into deep rebellion, and both suffer the consequences foretold in Deuteronomy chapter 28. The warnings of the prophets come to pass with devastating accuracy. The cities are besieged, the gates are burned, and the people are carried away into exile. The land that was meant to be a place of blessing becomes a place of sorrow and loss. The northern kingdom is conquered by the Assyrians and its people are scattered, lost to history as the 10 lost tribes. The Assyrian conquest is brutal and final, leaving behind only ruins and memories. The fate of the 10 lost tribes becomes one of the great mysteries of history, a symbol of the consequences of turning away from the covenant. The southern kingdom is later conquered by the Babylonians, and its people are taken into captivity. The Babylonian exile is a time of deep sorrow and reflection, but also of hope. In the midst of their suffering, the people begin to remember the promises of YaHuWaH and to long for restoration. The psalms and prayers composed during this time express both the pain of exile and the hope of return. This cycle of captivity and punishment is a crucial element of their identity and their relationship with YaHuWaH. It is in the crucible of suffering that the people are refined, their faith tested and strengthened. The experience of exile becomes a defining moment, shaping their understanding of themselves and their Elohim. The punishments are not meant to destroy them completely, but to discipline them, to purify them, and to ultimately cause them to remember their covenant and cry out for deliverance. The sunrise breaking through the storm clouds is a powerful symbol of hope and renewal. Even in the darkest moments, the possibility of redemption remains. And each time, after the period of punishment is complete, the promise of restoration remains. The green shoots sprouting in the cracked earth are a sign that life can return even to the most desolate places. This recurring theme of exile and return, of being scattered and one day regathered, is the central conflict of their story. The diaspora communities that have sprung up around the world are living reminders of both the pain of exile and the hope of return. The migration routes traced on ancient maps tell a story of loss and longing, but also of resilience and faith. It is a divine drama playing out on the stage of human history, with consequences that ripple into our modern world. The story of true Israel is not just an ancient tale, and it is not the narrative that we have been taught. It is a hidden truth that many are awakening to today. The beauty of the mission of YaHuWaH's chosen people is that through them, all of the Gentile nations will have a chance to be saved. The lessons of the past are not just for those who lived long ago, they are for all who seek to understand the real truth, accepting who the true descendants of ancient Israel and Judah are, the cost of their disobedience, and the coming power of their redemption. Thanks for watching. If you found this video enlightening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, please check out the powerful books written by TKW. The link is in the description.